Hey everyone, welcome back to part 5. In this section, we're going to talk about post-processing. We're going to use Photoshop and After Effects to finalize the look. We're going to use Photoshop to do some color corrections and add some little painted details. And then we're going to send it over to After Effects to composite everything. We're going to add the animated wires that we rendered, the fans. We're going to make some of the neon lights flicker. We're going to also make some of the neon lights change different colors so that they animate different colors. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and loaded the render into Photoshop here so we can start to create some of the layers that we're going to need to do the animation, and then we can also do some basic color corrections, add in our sky, and just do a couple little tweaks to the image first. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these changes in Photoshop here, and then we'll send it over to After Effects to do some of the little animations and things. So first, what I'm going to do is go to the channels and load in the alpha to the layer here. So I'm going to create a mask here for the sky. So what I'm going to do is create a background sky kind of layer here. I'm going to start with something that's very similar to just this blue color. So I'm just going to fill that in the background here. Okay, so I'm going to blend out the alpha here since it's going to be kind of just like a foggy look in the back. So I'm just going to fade this up a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of color correction here just to bring up the blacks and the midtones just a little bit here. So I'm going to add this color balance in here, and then I'm just going to play with some of the values here just to get a little bit of more color separation and things. Okay, and now I'm going to create like a new layer just to add in a little bit of lighting effects and some blooms around some of the lights. Particularly the blue. So I'm going to do the blue ones first. So I'm going to invert that, and now I can paint in some of these bloom effects. Okay, so I'm going to start to work a little bit more on some of the lighting techniques here. I'm going to add a couple flares. So I have loaded a couple flares that I normally use. So I'm going to start to paste these into here. And we'll change it to a screen mode. And then I'm going to erase some of it so it doesn't flare out too much here. We'll see, it might be a little bit strong here. Change the color of this one. Okay. That's pretty good. Let's expand it a little bit here. I want the light to flare a little bit more, and then again we can mask it and paint out some of this flare just so it doesn't stretch too far. Okay, so now I'm going to work a little bit on the neon here. Okay, so I rendered all the neon here as a layer in itself, so I can bring this in to use it as a mask or to just do things specifically for the neon. So I'm going to go ahead and create an alpha here and then mask it. And now we can layer this into the main one that we have. Okay, so now I've created a mask just for this sign on the blue, and I'm going to give it a little bit more of a neon effect here. So I'm going to add an outer glow. That's going to be a nice kind of deep blue. Find the right tightness here. And then we're going to add an inner glow as well. It's going to be pretty white so that it's going to add like this hot kind of core to the sign here. And then we could probably just screen that over or add it. That'll just help punch up the sign there a little bit. Because really what I'm trying to do is think about the focus of this image, and so the area over here is going to be the primary focus, these three kind of signs. So I just want to be sure they kind of become the main focus by either focusing the attention by the brightness or having more contrast in these areas and then less contrast in some of the other areas. So now I just need to add the glow using the same technique as before to the rest of the neon lights. I'm applying the outer glow and the inner glow to give that neon effect, and then adjusting the width of the radius of the fall offs so that it doesn't get too large around some of the neon tubes here. Okay, so to do the sky, I'm going to start with the sky template that I use. I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. We're probably going to have to change it a good bit because we want the sky to look like a little bit different than we have with some of the other skies. I'm going to remove this alpha because it's going to be a little bit more cloudy. So I'm going to have to do some work to make it work here. But at least it's a good template for me to kind of start from here. So the colors don't work here exactly because I think we're going to go with something that's a little bit more blue. So I'm going to try to color correct this, work on some of the atmosphere, and then the moon position. And then I'm just going to try to paint in some atmosphere and some clouds here just to push back the sky a little bit and to give it a little bit more atmosphere. It's too kind of clear based on the atmosphere that we added in the 3D render, so we need to kind of match that look now to the background sky. Okay, so I'm just checking some of the details here. I think we've got everything set up pretty well. We've got everything glowing here. Maybe the last thing I'm going to do is make this buy, trade, sell glow just a little bit more, give it a little bit of a hotter core, because you can't read it really well when you're back further. So let's see, let's go ahead and bring this layer over one more time. Here, duplicate it over so that it's going to come into position here. And then I'm just going to select the area in between here. Well, what we'll do, let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a glow here. So I'm going to fill the layer with blue here, and then I'll add an outer glow just a little bit. You can screen that, and then the inner glow, and then let's just screen it or add it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now that reads pretty well. The other thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to bring out this album. It's a little bit dark here. This is the Purple Rain album by Prince. So let's see if we can bring that out a little bit more. So I'm going to create a mask for it and then see if we can, read it a little bit better. It's probably going to be impossible to really read this, but okay, that's pretty good. That just lifts it a little bit so that, so that we can see that a little bit better. Okay, so while I do like the sky that we have in here, temporarily at least, I rendered out a background with some buildings and some more fog on things, just to kind of see if it fits in a little bit better with the atmosphere and the alleyway that we have going on here. So I'm playing a little bit with some of the colors and the values just to see if we can create a little bit more depth and add a little bit more atmosphere into the background here. I kind of like what the buildings are doing, the way they kind of go back up into the sky. And then we can still add our moon kind of over to the left side here. So I'm going to try this as a second option, and we can see as we go along if we want to keep this or go back to the other version. In the meantime, I'm going to work on painting out some of the neon here so that we can create a off state for the neon. That way, when we load it into After Effects, we can use it to kind of flicker some of these neon signs. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue to paint out some of these areas that we can use to mask in After Effects. I went ahead and exported the Photoshop layers, And now we can start to bring them into After Effects. So now we can start to work on getting some of the animations going. We can bring in some of the other elements. So we can start to create the animated looping reel here. I'm going to create a new sequence here, and I'm going to make it 10 seconds long at 24 frames per second because that's what we set our scene to when we rendered everything out of Maya. And so now I'm going to go ahead and bring in the main background that I have here, and I'm going to bring in also the off state that we painted in Photoshop. Next, let's go ahead and bring in some of the flares that we had in Photoshop. I saved them out as a separate layer so that then when we bring them in now, we can create like an animation kind of flicker to them. I'm going to go ahead and keyframe the opacity of these layers just a little bit. So they gotta go up and down. And then I'm gonna use an expression here in After Effects to cycle or loop them. The expression is called loop out. So if I do a couple keyframes here, then what I can do is create the expression and then it's gonna loop those keyframes over and over so I don't have to keep doing it throughout the whole sequence here. So I go ahead and do that and I'm gonna apply that to all the flares that I brought in here. Next, I'm going to drop in some of the animations that we rendered out of Maya. So here we have the wires that we rendered, and I'm going to apply the correct ACES LUT to this. So the input is going to be ACES CG, and then the output color space is going to be sRGB. So that will get us into the correct color space. And then I'm also going to add levels just to color correct it to fit into the scene a little bit better. And I'll bring in the fans rendered animation as well. I'm going to apply the same ACES CG LUT to the fans and the same levels so that it drops in looking pretty close to the background here. And then what I'm going to do is go through each of the fans and mask out each fan so that really all we're seeing is the animated part of the fan. We don't really need any rest of the fan bodies since we rendered those and those are static. So I'm just going to continue to go around here and add masks to all the fans and then add a little bit of feathering to the mask just so that it all blends in well. Since we rendered everything to be looped, we can extend the clip here so that it expands to the full timeline. All right, now that we got a bunch of the elements in here and composited in, let's go ahead and do a little bit of a preview so we can see how some of the animation is working. So that's kind of cool. Cool to see the wires moving around, the fans. And we got some of the animation on some of the LED lights here. All right, this is looking pretty good. Let's continue on and we can start working on some of the flickering lights. Let's start working on some of the flickering neon signs. We can create some rough kind of mats around some of the signs that we want to flicker. And then we can use the opacity of that mask to do some of the animations. We can kind of animate that opacity up and down to kind of make it seem like it's flickering. We can also adjust the feathering so that it kind of blends in well at the edges and so that we don't notice that it's masked in. So I'm just starting to kind of create some of these masks and then I'll start to keyframe some of the opacity as well so that we can get it animating. As I create these keyframes, I try to be sure that they're spread out so that it's not flickering all the time. And I keep needing to preview the animation just to be sure it doesn't feel too flickery all over the place. We want to make everything seem like it's alive, but not like it's too busy or not too flickery all over the place. For the last effects, we're going to go ahead and create some rain. I like to do this in a couple different ways. One of the ways is to create a color solid in After Effects and then add the CC rainfall. Then I can tweak some of the settings here, like the direction and the speed, and I get pretty good resolution out of the After Effects rainfall here. I also like to add a little bit of contact splashing and ripples down on the ground so that it sells the rain effect a little bit. I have two different methods. I have a plate that I rendered out of Maya that I kind of position as a subtle overlay. Another method that I use to add ripples to the ground is by creating planes with animated ripples and a 3D camera all in After Effects. This then allows me to match the camera and the planes to the 3D render so that it fits in with the perspective correctly. In the past, I've done simulations in a 3D program, but I find this technique faster because I can kind of reposition everything and then I don't have to wait for a simulation and for a render. All right, that finishes off all the effects we needed to add, and now it's time to kick off the final renders from After Effects. Thank you so much for following along, and here is the final animation. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay tuned for new videos.